All right, let's get into it. 8A competition rules. I'm going to do a brief introductions. These two I do every week. I'm going to time myself. It takes 1 minute. And then we're going to look at federal supply schedules and 8A sole source orders. Is that an acceptable combination? We'll look at how often it's done, and then we'll look at the FAR citations that are applicable. Federal supply schedules and 8A competed orders. Is that an acceptable combination? GWAC 8A STARS II program, and then 8A sole source orders against STARS II. If you have a GWAC that was competitively awarded using a socioeconomic set-aside, can you then do a sole source socioeconomic set-aside at the order level against that GWAC? That's this one here. If you have a BPA and IDC that's 8A competed, so not an FSS, but a BPA or IDC 8A competed, can you do an 8A sole source order under those contracts? And we're going to take a look at the 8A competitive threshold and what that entails, and then do a recap of what's allowed, what's not allowed, and some rules for the road. Your input is greatly appreciated. I see we have some people on here who have contributed to this webinar. I'm not necessarily going to give them their name, but they know who they are, and I hope they speak up and offer some input, and particularly hopefully I don't have anything wrong, but if I do, doubly encouraged to speak up. Bob Harford, VP Business Intelligence Products, that's who I am. I mentioned our YouTube channel. Potomac Wave is a women-owned small business located in Alexandria. A bunch of different vehicles we're on, such as Oasis. We do other metrics besides FPDS&G data quality, which is what this webinar topic falls under. One of the things we're doing now is flagging active awards that are associated with a vendor that has a delinquent federal debt, now known as a debt subject to offset. So take a look at some of these other metric areas, and if those interest you, I'll stay on the line afterwards and we can talk about it further. Incidentally, we just added Department of State came on as a trial, so we have 13 agencies working with us at this time. Okay, FSS, Federal Supply Schedules, and 8A sole sources. Let's go with the first question here, and we're going to do a poll. How many civilian 8A sole source delivery orders were there against Federal Supply Schedules in 2017? Let's take that poll. Okay. All right, I'm going to select the poll, and I'm going to launch it. The poll is distributing, collecting responses. So is it, not percent, but is it 100? Yeah, 100 orders, sole source 8A delivery orders against federal supply schedules. And we're talking about mod 0. I'm not talking about, P1, P2, any of that. Just the initial award, the mod 0. How many of those were there in FY17 against FSSs? Those being 8A sole source delivery orders. We'll give it about another 30 seconds here. It's about equally divided between 200, 500, that should be 1,000, and 10,000. Okay, so the responses we had, it was pretty even. No real distinct winner. 200, 500, 10,000 was what. So let's see how many there were. We're talking about civilian awards. And the answer is 199. These are BPA calls. I think they're all delivery orders. I can uncheck BPA call. Yeah. Delivery orders against federal supply schedules where the delivery order used an 8A sole source award. There were 199. The point being pretty widespread throughout the government. Executive Office of the President, Small Business Administration did that. Let's just take a look at that. So I'm going to uncheck. This is our Excel interface. Some departments have access to this, some don't. It depends on the firewall rules set up by the department. So if I look at this one here, we'll go out to FPDS&G and take a look at it. I do have a question, and I will get to that. But I want to look at this SBA award. $7,300 SBA, Small Business Administration. And it used an 8A sole source award. And we will just check to see if that's a federal supply schedule. And yes, it is, FSS. So SBA in FY17 is making 8A sole source set-asides going against federal supply schedules. What do you mean by civilian? I mean anything that doesn't have a department ID of 9,700. So no Navy, no Air Force. I'm not counting those in any of our statistics today. Defense Logistics Agency. The terminology of FFS Part 8 should be limited source, not sole source. Teresa, Terry, can you hear me?
Hey, Bob, can you hear me?
Yep,
Bob?
go ahead. Can you
Okay.
elaborate?
Yes. After our discussion last week, I kept thinking about it, and the terminology, I guess, is the most important thing because you can have limited source justification on FSS, on the schedule. It's kind of what we would call, it would be equivalent to a sole source if you were going open market, because you do call it sole source on open market. But if you're going through FSS, it's not really considered sole source, or shouldn't be. It should be limited source. So my second question to throw in there was, is there a drop down on this menu where you just showed us where it says sole source? Is there a drop down on that menu? I'm thinking that there is, that can say limited source. So maybe because they're thinking they only had one, they're thinking that it's sole source. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. So you're saying on this SBA award, so I am using, you brought in some things there. Hopefully I can respond, but.
I don't think you can open that one up. What I was trying to see is if you, on the drop down there.
On the type of set-aside drop down?
Right.
Okay.
No, down on fair opportunity limited sources is what I was looking at. See where it says sole source there? If it's an FSS, that should be, I believe it should be limited sources or only one source. There's a drop down. There's like 6 or 7 different things that you can pick as far as the fair opportunity, right? So in that case, I was looking at this one, not at the top on the sole source 8A set aside.
Okay. Now, what we said though on this one was the FSS is going to be, that's got to be full and open with no set-aside use, although it can be a small business set-aside. Let's take a look. So this one did not use a set-aside, the FSS that is being referenced.
Right. So it shouldn't have been used on the order either then.
So the only way you can get, the only way that it's possible to enter 8A sole source here is if you select sole source in the fair opportunity limited sources field. It's the only way that field opens up. The only way type of set-aside field opens up is if you got two choices, actually. Sole source in the fair opportunity limited sources field or competitive set-aside.
Right.
So if
you could have also used on the type of set-aside, you could have, I guess, maybe not done a set-aside or sole source anyway, and you still would have had a limited source. What I'm saying is I think
you could have, right.
should have been.
Yeah, there's only, you could put only one source.
Correct.
I
think it should have been marked a little differently, which I think maybe that's part of the problem of us having more than what we would think we would have, because they're probably not actually sole sources, but because there's only one, they're thinking that it's a sole source. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And they're just picking that drop down instead.
Well, let's assume, I hear you. Let's just assume for the purposes of this webinar that this is what they did.
Okay.
I hear you. What you're saying is maybe there was only one source and they just coded it this way incorrectly. They really didn't use a set-aside. They just had an only one source justification. So that's what they should have put in the fair opportunity field. Okay. I think that's what you're saying, right, Terry?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. Anyway, okay. So what did we say there? So the answer to the question was there were 200 of these in FY17, and they're spread throughout the government, including the SBA. What does the FAR have to say about this? FAR 19502-4C, set-aside orders placed under multiple award contracts for any of the small business concerns identified in 19.00A3. For orders, and we get to this one next, for orders placed under Federal Supply Schedule C 8405-5. So, and we're going to look at that. Okay, 19.00A3, the key point there is setting acquisitions aside for exclusive competitive participation by small businesses, 8A participation in hub zone. Let's go out to the, let me go out to the FAR and we'll actually pull this up because this is a key point, kind of the key whole point on this webinar. FAR 19502-4C, 502-4C. So here we're talking set-asides for small businesses. 502-4C. Set-aside orders placed under multiple award contracts placed under multiple for any of the small businesses identified in 19.00A3. That's competitive. For orders placed under Federal Supply Schedule Program C 8405-5. Again, it references 405-5 references 19.00A3, which again is competitive participation amongst the socioeconomic groups. And down here is where you get to how you can limiting sources when ordering against federal supply schedules. Orders or BPAs established under federal supply schedules. And orders or BPAs exceeding the micro purchase threshold based on a limited sources justification. However, let me back up just a second here. However, an order and activity must justify its action when restricting consideration in accordance with paragraphs A and B of this section. Okay, so paragraph A starts here, and they talk about urgent and compelling needs. There's a justification for limiting the sources when ordering against the federal supply schedule. Only one source, which Terry, you said might have been the case in that last one we looked at, even though they didn't code it that way. Follow-on contract. There's nothing in paragraph A that says you can limit sources when ordering against the federal supply schedule based on the socioeconomic status of based on a socioeconomic status. If you want to compete it, if you want to do a limit your sources and compete the award, that's a different story. But if you're limiting, if a non-competitive order and you're limiting the sources, socioeconomic is not in this first paragraph A. Then paragraph B, they talk about brand name justification. Anyway, any comments out there? Let's see. I got let's see, Jeff Hale. Hey, Jeff, I can put you on here. So it sounds like it takes care of the discussion we were having earlier. There's not sole source for any of these socioeconomic categories.
Based on the reference to the 19 part that you were talking about, yeah.
Right.
That makes it clear to me.
Okay. All right. That was anyway. You can read these FAR things for yourself. But let's move on. If there are any other questions here. So FAR 8405-6, no authority to limit sources on orders against federal supply schedules based on socioeconomic status. I should say not competitive. On not competitive orders. And you can also look at the different FAR parts regarding, say, the hub zone or the service disabled veteran-owned small business. They say specifically in it, so 1304C, orders against are excluded from the hub zone program. So they're in that, all those parts on the socioeconomic, they'll say, okay, what's included in the hub zone? Well, we can go out and take a look, 19.3. .13 hub zone program. And so I'm looking under 19.13 hub zone program. You come down to exclusions. C, orders against federal supply schedules. So you'll also see that in the statistics. So if you come over here, you'll see, well, I notice we have one person on from Treasury. Let's see. Let's take a look at that award. I'm going to go out to, we'll take a look at this hub zone, which is an analogous situation. Okay, so here's a delivery order. We will come down to the socioeconomic status. I got a hub zone sole source, and we'll just double check to see if that is a federal supply schedule. And it is. Thomas Olin, can you hear me? No? Okay. But anyway, so that would be, you can't do an 8A sole source against a federal supply schedule. You can't do a hub zone sole source against a federal supply schedule. That's per FAR 84056, and it actually states it very explicitly in the hub zone program in FAR Part 19. Okay, I got a question here too from, is there a way to find out if the 199 8As against FSSs had to do with emergency buying? That's a good question. And the answer is, I don't know. If they did, if it was an emergency buying, so that the question there is, that is one of the justifications for doing a sole source award against a federal supply schedule, is that it was an emergency. We could look at the fair opportunity. Well, what was that in the FAR? Well, first of all, let's look at that in the FPDS&G Data Dictionary. If you do want to participate in the conversation, you do have to enter in that PIN. So that could be why, if you can hear me but I can't hear you, that could be a reason. So we'll look at Fair Opportunity Limited, looking at the version 1.5 Data Dictionary. Here we go. So we saw that the question is, we saw them putting sole source as a justification against that federal supply schedule, and then going up and picking a socioeconomic set-aside, such as 8A sole source or hub zone sole source. What if, like what Terry was saying and what Cynthia is also suggesting, what if it was just an emergency? Well, then really what they should have coded then, if I'm looking at the picks here, is just put URG, urgency, in the fair opportunity limited sources field, and then the type of set-aside field is ghosted out. It takes on the value of the associated IDV. So if they were emergency based, then that's and here again, this was a federal supply schedule. Hub zone sole source. This should have been just left, blank, or it would have taken on the value of the associated federal supply schedule set aside, which is none. And then in the fair opportunity, it should have been urgency, if it was associated with emergency buying. Okay, so let's move on. What's the bottom line? No socioeconomic sole source awards against federal supply schedule. There's other reasons for doing a sole source. We just went through the urgency example, but socioeconomic is not one of them. Competitive socioeconomic, not, as we'll see. Let's go through the next one. 8A competed awards against federal supply schedules. Are they okay? We'll go, what percentage of orders against federal supply schedules used a small business set-aside? Let me get to that poll. Okay. Okay, I've lost, oh, there it is. Okay. There we go. So that is going to be this one. Let's launch it. What percentage of civilian awards against federal supply schedules used a small business set-aside in FY17? So this would include ones that erroneously used we saw 199 erroneously used a sole source socioeconomic set-aside, but how many used either a sole source or a competitive small business set-aside against the federal supply schedule? The winner so far is 25%. I got it 52% of you, or half, are saying it's approximately 2 here, by the way, 25%. A lot are saying 8%, 15%. We'll give it another few. 25% is winning. Okay, the winner was 25%. Let's take a look. The answer is 8%. The vast majority of orders against federal supply schedules did not use the set-aside. No, 92%. 5% here used a small business set-aside. That was the biggest. Service disabled veteran owned if a small business set-aside was used, that was way ahead of 8A or Hub Zone or women owned. So kind of interesting. Very few sole sources, as we saw, but they do exist, and those are the ones we're saying are not correct. Okay, let's get back to the slide here. And we'll look at FAR 8. Let's go back to FAR 8405 again. FAR 8405. Four oh five five. 4055. Order and activity contracting officers may, at their discretion, set aside orders for any of the small business concerns identified in 19.00A3 and set aside BPAs for any of the small business concerns identified in 19.00A3. 19.00A3 set acquisitions aside for exclusive competitive participation. That's the key. And we can look at the ones for the specifically listed for, I believe that's the hub zone, 19502-4C. One, 2, 4C. Okay, multiple award contracts in small business set aside C. Set aside orders placed under multiple award contracts in FS for any of the small businesses identified in 19 AA03 for orders placed under Federal Supply Schedule Program C8405-5, which we just reviewed. So pretty clear there. Carving out socioeconomic awards against federal supply schedules is a perfectly acceptable acquisition strategy as long as it's done competitively. All right, let's get into one here now that's we're going to shift over to. So we saw that you cannot do an 8A sole source against a federal supply schedule. Can you do an 8A sole source award against a GWAC, specifically against the 8A STARS II program? And we'll start out with one more poll. What percentage of orders against STARS used an 8A sole source set aside? Pretty even selection so far. Most at the top there, 13, 15%. 13% is winning. Thirteen and 15% are the popular choices. Give it another few seconds. Okay, and 13% was it. That's what most of you picked. So if we go against 8A STARS, I am assuming that all GWACs that were awarded through an 8A competed set-aside are the 8A STARS program. I didn't go through and verify each and every one of them. But the 81%, when that order goes in against the 8A STARS program, the value, 4 out of 5, it's 8A competed. 13% of the time, it's 8A sole source. They got some other ones down here too. SDVO, SB sole source, women-owned small business. I guess that's another question. Anyone have an opinion? Anyone want to raise their hand on that? Can you do a women-owned small business set-aside and reference the 8A STARS program? I guess we can see if that actually was an 8A STARS 1. Okay, let's go see if that women-owned small business did reference the 8A STARS program. Or the SDVO, Service Disabled Veteran one, for that matter. Okay. Shoot. Okay, it's an agriculture farm service agency, women-owned small business. And let's go look at what this was. It's a GWAC. It doesn't say 8A stars. Oh, it does right here. 8A stars. Type of set-aside 8A competed. So they carved out, they referenced the 8A stars program, and they carved out a women-owned small business set-aside against it. It seems a little, doesn't seem right to me, but I'm not, it's just, it's unusual. It rarely happens. All right, here we go.
So Bob, I just pulled up the ordering guide, and it says
Yep.
exactly what the public law says, that they may at their discretion set aside orders for any of the small business concerns identified in 19. So it sounds like, according to the ordering guide, they could.
All right. So obviously they can do that, but they're not, you would not get, interestingly, you would not get 8A credit for that. I'm certain you would not. You get women-owned small business credit for that order. So you would compete that. It would be only women-owned small businesses that are 8A firms would be the only possibility, since they're in the GS 8A stars program. So you get the WSB and small business credit, but you would not get 8A credit for that.
I would think you would, because the underlying GWAC's 8A. So I think you get both. Really?
The type of set-aside has got to be 8A competed or 8A sole source for you to get credit.
Okay. Interesting.
Or you can get the out-of-date one is the hub zone with 8A. They don't use that anymore. It's got to be one of those three. Otherwise, it doesn't count. I could.
If they would have coded it as 8A and the firm was a WOSP, they would get credit both ways that way.
They would have gotten credit both ways.
Yeah, interesting.
Well, I guess we could. Okay, here's that award. I'm just going to throw it over here. Maybe we might not get through all of this if people are going to have to drop off, but, let's answer that question right now. Did that agriculture get 8A credit when they made a women-owned small business set-aside against the GSA 8A stars program? And we're going to find that out right now. So I'm going to go to the small business goaling report in FPDS&G. And I'm going to put in the date that award was made, which is right here. I'm going to put in the department, which we said was agriculture. I'm going to put in the office agency, the funding agency, not the contracting agency, the funding agency. I have to put in the funding office. I don't have room for that. So I'll see if I'll get away with the funding office. Small business, I'm sure everyone knows, those statistics are generated by who funded the award, not who contracted the award. Okay, good. Look at this. So I can drill down to award detail now. Well, anyway, I can see right now that the 8A procedures is 0. So I'll drill down to the PID level. And we've answered our question. So here it is, AG 315 D170091. That's it right here. So if you see this, AG 315 D170091, there it is. And we will go over, we'll look across here. You can also drill down to them. That's what we said it was a mod 0. You can look at the mod 0 too. Mod 0, there it is. Let's scroll over to the 8A procedures. See that, Jeff? 0.
Yep,
You
sure
do
enough.
not get 8A credit for that. Okay. You can do it, but no 8A credit. Anyway, so if you go out to the, so the answer is yes. You can do 8A sole source awards against the 8A STARS program. So the 8A STARS was awarded through, that is a competitive 8A set-aside. And when you go do your order, we can look at the ordering guide here. Well, we can go out to the home page. And we'll look at the ordering guide. Directed. Here we go. The 8A STARS II GWAC is a competitively awarded multiple award indefinite delivery indefinite quantity contract. STARS II was authorized under provisions of Section 8A of the Small Business Act and retains the 8A sole source, aka directed order authority. Of course, the competitive threshold applies, and we're going to get into that a little bit later, about the competitive threshold. All right, I got a comment here. They would get SDB credit, but not 8A credit. That is correct. Thank you, Maury. That's a good point. So when you make an award to an 8A company, or an 8A company wins that award, you always get SDB credit unless there's some strange circumstance, such as the award being funded through foreign military sales. But outside of a very few extremely rare conditions, you're going to get SDB credit when you make that award to the 8A vendor. May or may not get 8A credit depending on the type of set-aside that was used. All right, let's get into the next one. So you have a GWAC that's a competitive socioeconomic award. Can you then do a sole source against that GWAC using socioeconomic? Here's the example we were looking at here. Well, actually, I want to look at this one first. Here's where we're getting into the answer is not definitively known at this time. At least I don't know it. I think I know the answer, but based on input I've received. But if someone out here can provide some input, that would be great. Here's a security exchange delivery order fairly recently. And if I scroll down to the competition section, they used a hub zone sole source set aside. Delivery order, hub zone sole source. Now if I go out to this NASA Soup Award, it's a GWAC, it's not an FSS, it's a GWAC. And they used a hub zone, a competitively awarded hub zone set aside. So SEC decided to use a hub zone sole source award strategy against a GWAC that was a competitively awarded hub zone. It does say in FAR 19 under the hub zone subpart under FAR Part 19, the contracting officer can do a sole source if he or she does not have a reasonable expectation that offers would be received from two or more hub zone small business concerns. So there's that. And now what about an 8A sole source award against a competitively awarded 8A GWAC. And here's an SBA award. You'd think they would know, although we saw previously that they did an 8A sole source against an FSS, which everyone, I think, agrees that is not allowed. Should agree. I mean, we're stating that as fact. 8A sole source, any small socioeconomic sole source against a federal supply schedule, not allowed. But here's one that's a slightly different case. So here's the delivery order. Small Business Administration, delivery order, 8A sole source. That was their strategy. Let's look at the GWAC. The GWAC was an 8A stars. So actually we're saying we already know that one's not correct. We'll look at another example. But actually we already know that the 8A sole source against the GWAC is not correct. Oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry. That is okay. I take that back. I thought that was at the 8A stars. We already saw that the 8A, I'm going to have to take that one out, or at least go back and double check it. 8A sole source awards against the GSA STARS program is perfectly okay. So that comment comes out. I thought that was not, when I was looking at that earlier, I'm going to have to come up with a better example on that. That one's out. We saw a hub zone sole source using hub zone competitive set-aside. You do see a lot of SDVO sole source against SDVO competitive set-asides. The thinking is that's okay. Anyone have a comment on that? We don't have the documentation for sure on that. Let's see. The FPDS defaults to the GWAC FPDS unless a fair opportunity is selected. Let's see. Maury, if you put in your PIN, I could get you talking. You have to put in your PIN on the thing. I don't quite understand your question. The FPDS defaults, right, okay, I think you're saying the set-aside, the FPDS and G set-aside. And that is correct. Unless you change that fair opportunity to sole source or competitive set-aside, the set-aside on the order is going to be the same as the set-aside on the IDV. All right, we'll come back to that in the final recap. But the tentative conclusion is that a hub zone sole source order against an IDV that used a hub zone competitive set-aside is okay. SDV sole source against an IDV that used an SDV competitive set-aside, okay. Now here's the one we wanted. This is going to be a better discussion here. EPAs and IDCs that were 8A competed, can you do an 8A sole source order against those? And here is an SB. Let's look at this SBA order. Okay, so here you have a BPA call that is 8A sole source, done by the Small Business Administration. BPA call, the acquisition strategy was an 8A sole source. Let's look at what the BPA was. The BPA was a Part 8 BPA, and it was 8A competed. And there are other examples as well. Obviously, the competitive threshold applies. How many of these were there? Rather than doing a poll, we'll just take a look. There have been 4 since FY17. So there are 4 cases where the delivery order was done through an 8A sole source and it referenced an IDC or a BPA that was awarded as 8A competed. One of them was done by the SBA. Tentative thinking is that that's okay too. FAR 19800B, contracts may be awarded to the SBA for performance by eligible 8A participants on either a sole source or competitive basis. And then you can also go out and look at a statute on that, which I might not have. Any comments on that? So you don't have the 8A STARS program, but you have your own um, 8A BPA, Part 8 BPA, competitively awarded, or an IDC. You want to look at that statute here. Okay, how does SBA accept the procurement for award through the 8A Business Development Program? You come down to H. 2, it allows orders issued to 8A participants under multiple award contracts. Allowing orders issued to 8A participants under multiple award contracts that were not set aside for exclusive competition among eligible 8A participants. We'll have to see how that plays into it. But that, Jeff, this was one that you pointed out, in that if you had you know, when you do issue an 8A award against a multiple award contract, unless it was restricted, unless that MAC was restricted to 8A participants, it does have to be done on a competitive basis. Do I have that about right?
Yep.
Okay. Well, we're kind of going down the rabbit hole a little bit on this. I'm getting tongue-tied myself. I think we'll come back to this one at another time, but that's an interesting reference, H2, under how does the SBA accept the procurement for award through the 8A BD program. Okay. We're almost coming to the end here. Well, I did want to go through the 8A competitive threshold. And if you look at the 19805-1A2, I'm sure virtually all of you already know this. The anticipated total value of the contract, including options, will exceed $7 million for acquisitions assigned manufacturing North American industry classification codes and $4 million for all other acquisitions. What is the manufacturing NAICS code? If it begins with 31, 32, or 33. Compete 8A awards if over the threshold or get SBA approval for an 8A sole source award. So if it's over that threshold, 19804-2A15 applies, you got to compete it or get approval. Conversely, if it's under the threshold, SBA is expecting a sole source award unless you get approval to compete it. We currently flag awards in Fed Data Check if they are over the competitive threshold and an 8A sole source award was done. We'll flag those. And you can write in the Data Check exception form that you did get SBA approval to issue it on a sole source basis. The only agency that does this, they include as a data check error, and the CO will get an email alert if it is 8A competed and it is under the threshold. So if you do a $150,000 award based on all options value and you say it was 8A competed, that would actually trigger an error, an email alert and an error notice if you work for NOAA. Is there any comments there? Does anyone, I know that I spoke with Treasury earlier today, and they were seeming to say that was the same thing for them. Does anyone else? Let's see here. I would like to call on someone. Yes. Lydia, can you hear me? Lydia Domenech? No? Okay. Well, I'd love to get a comment. If someone could enter in that pin, but just as long as the value is under the threshold for sole source, right? I don't fully understand that comment, but who, if you could raise your hand, maybe I'm going to take the hands away. How many of you out there, just go ahead and raise your hand, if you think, if an 8A award, 8A contract, definitive contract for $1 million is awarded, and the type of set-aside was 8A competed, do you think that 99 times out of 100, that's an error? That's either a procurement error or a data entry error. It should have been 8A sole source. And do you think that should be flagged no differently than if they designated General Electric as a small business, or said cost accounting standards applied and it was awarded to a small business? Is that in all likelihood an error if 8A competed is tied to a low dollar value award? Any hands on that? Yep, I see some hands popping up. Okay, well that would be something we might want to look to extend to. Again, NOAA considers that an error, but they're the only ones at this point. And based on what we just read, seems like they're right. I got a question here. How do the competed 8A STARS orders get tagged? Cynthia, if you can hear me and explain that, or...
Well, okay, if they're using the competitive 8A STARS program and they have a contract under 4 million, isn't that going to be competed 8A?
Huh.
And that was right after I answered, yes, it should be flagged if it's not, but.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else have a comment on that? So you got the 8A stars. It's going to be 8A competed on the GWAC. You come along then and say, well, here's this vehicle out there. I need some IT services or IT products or whatever else you can get. Do that expansive program.
I think there's going to be exceptions to the rule, and like 8A stars would probably be one of those exceptions.
That's a good one. Good question. I'll take a note of that. $8A stars orders under 4 million are apt to come through as 8A competed. Yeah. Okay. So the answer is, that's a good question, Cynthia. All right, let me see if I can wrap this up here with to provide some sense of all the stuff we've looked at. Federal supply schedules and 8A sole source orders, okay? No, they're not. That was one of the key points. You know, we came out, all of this started with this report. So what we were looking at was, we were looking at awards that were miscoded in FPDS&G and were likely 8A awards but were not coded as such. So here's a BPA call. If I come across to this is probably did use an 8A set aside. It only received one offer. It was against a BPA. They have a justification as to why it was only one source, and it was given to an 8A vendor, self-certified 8A. So we think that they just miscoded in an FPDS&G and didn't put in the 8A sole source set aside. But some of these others that reference federal supply schedules, like this one, we'll take a look at this one. This references a federal supply schedule. And likewise, they said they had some reason why it was only one source. They got one offer, and it was to an 8A vendor. So this one likely has two problems. One, they didn't code it as an 8A sole source award, when in fact that's what happened. And two, they should have done it anyway because it was against the federal supply schedule. So that was
Bob,
the
to interrupt too much. I'm still in that ordering guide for 8A stars, and it says in there, in order to do a competition under the $4 million threshold, the ordering agency must seek and receive approval from SBA. So you're not supposed to do it in stars unless you have the approval from SBA.
Even at the order level.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. Well, that's great. Thanks, Jeff. That answers that question. Okay. Federal supply schedules coupled with 8A sole source orders, no. Federal supply schedules coupled with 8A competed orders, A-OK. GWAC 8A stars program and 8A sole source orders, yep. Check. You can do that. You got a GWAC competitive socioeconomic award coupled with a sole source socioeconomic order. That's the hub zone. You set up you got a GWAC out there with NASA Soup. It's a hub zone, and it was competitively awarded. Can you then, under that, do a hub zone sole source award? If you got an SDVO, GWAC, can you do an SDVO sole source? I'm going to say yes, but I can't say so that definitively at this point. And here's one here. We didn't come up with an example, but if you cannot do an 8A sole source order if the corresponding multiple award contract was not an 8A award. That was what that H2 was. But anyway, hub zone competitive, hub zone sole source order. You got a tentative yes on that. You got a BPA or an IDC that's 8A competed. Can you do an 8A sole source order under that? Yes. But cannot say so definitively. Anyone else think you can say so definitively? Please speak up. That was that one. We saw that with that SBA award. So you could say that Small Business Administration is doing it. Man, that would be pretty good. Just, I suppose, you would think they would know, but they're doing 8A sole source BPA calls against 8A BPAs that were Part 8 BPAs that were competitively awarded. That was this one right here. Part 8 BPA awarded through 8A competition. It came through and did an 8A sole source award underneath that BPA. All right, how about this for 2 general rules as you're trying to get work done? When you're making an order and you go across and check the IDV, if it says an FSS, 8A sole source delivery orders are not authorized. Conversely, if when you go across and you're checking your IDV and you see 8A competed set aside, 8A sole source delivery order can be authorized. Jeff, what do you think? Jeff Hill, Jeff, by the way, was the one who really got this ball started.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Okay. And this other stuff, lastly, we're talking about this other stuff and saying, wow, okay, geez, now I got a hub zone competitive. Can I do a hub zone sole source? Let's go back and check how often that actually happens. Two. So in FY17, you got a hub zone sole source against the hub zone set aside. You got a total of 2. So it's pretty rare when those things come up. But I hope that helps. I do have one more question. Well, we've gone a little bit over. I'll wrap it up. I think I saw you make some changes to PowerPoint. Will those changes be reflected on a link? Right. The best thing, I will update that. The best thing to do, I should do that. I will go back. I think I can I edit? Let me ask one question. Can I edit the handout once I stop the webinar? Okay, I'll have to do that right now. I'll do that before I hang up. So after we stop, I'll make sure that my changes to the PowerPoint get pushed over to the handout section. Any final comments, everybody? I appreciate all the participation. That was great. I'll also I'll stop the webinar, but I will stay on. If anyone wants to take a question offline. All right, that ran a little bit over. Thanks a lot. thanks everyone who behind the scenes provided great input into this. And I'll see you next week. And next week is, the competitive one bid. It's very interesting stuff there. They've changed the rules on that. We think, I'm positive, it's being incorrectly calculated for FY17. And that has a big impact when you're comparing FY17 to FY18 competitive one bids. And that's something that's going to be much easier to get your head around than it was for me on this. So anyway, thanks. I will stay on the line if people have any questions.